and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladia Kiridulale, the headlines. Vladimir Zelensky says Kiev needs faster supplies and new weapons to confront a tough situation. Russia accuses Ukraine of killing 14 people in a deliberate strike on hospital in the Russian-held settlement of Novodar. Plus, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says NATO is concerned about North Korea's, quote, reckless missile tests. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome to the program. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says his country is facing a very tough situation in the eastern Donetsk region and needs faster weapon supplies and new types of weaponry to withstand Russia's attacks. Speaking during his nightly address, Mr. Zelensky said the country needed faster delivery of supplies and weapons to counter Russia's efforts in exhausting Ukraine's forces.
The enemy doesn't count personnel, and despite numerous casualties, keeps the intensity of its attacks in some of its wars. Russia had suffered fewer losses than it faced here, particularly near Bakhmut. And this can only be countered by extraordinary resilience and a complete awareness that our soldiers are defending the whole of Ukraine when they defend the Donetsk region. Today, I chaired a regular meeting of the headquarters of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief. The main focus, of course, was placed on the situation at the front, primarily in the Donetsk region and in the southern areas. The situation is very tough. Bakhmut, Volodar, and other areas in the Donetsk region are under constant Russian assault. There are constant attempts to break through our defenses. Russia hopes to drag out the war and exhaust our forces. So, we have to make time our weapon. We have to accelerate developments. We have to speed up the supply and launch of new necessary military operation for Ukraine.
Meanwhile, Russia's foreign ministry has accused the Ukrainian army of deliberately striking a hospital in the Russian-held settlement of Novodar, calling it a war crime that killed 14 people and wounded 24 others. There were no responses for the allegations from Ukraine. The alleged strike had been carried out using a U.S.-supplied HIMARS rocket launch system. The Russian Foreign Ministry said in a statement that the deliberate shelling of active civilian medical facilities and the targeted killing of civilians are grave war crimes of the Kiev regime and its Western masters. Ukraine and its allies have also accused Russian forces of frequent war crimes in the conflict in which thousands of civilians have been killed and cities and towns pounded by artillery and airstrikes. Russia has, however, denied targeting civilians. Meanwhile, 3 people have been killed by Russian forces in the southern Ukrainian city of Kherson. The administration wrote on the Telegram, a quote, "Today's Russian shelling injured 9 people, 3 people died, 2 men and 1 woman, 6 were injured. As a result of enemy shelling, a number of civil infrastructure objects were damaged. The Kherson Regional Clinical Hospital, a school, a bus station, a post office, a bank and residential buildings." Kherson was occupied by Russian troops from the early days of Moscow's invasion of Ukraine before being recaptured by Kiev in November. Since its liberation, officials say the city has regularly been shelled from the Russian side. In Kharkiv, a missile hit an apartment building, killing 1 person and injuring others. Regional Governor Ole Sinehubov said the strike took place in the city's central Kiev district. Mr. Sinehubov wrote on Telegram, according to the updated information, 1 person has died as a result of a strike by a Russian missile on a residential building. He put the number of injured at 3, adding that the injured were receiving treatment. And former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says Russian President Vladimir Putin threatened him with a missile strike in a phone call last year prior to Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. Speaking in an interview, Mr. Johnson said, quote, "He threatened me at one point and said, you know, Boris, I don't want to hurt you, but with a missile, it would only take a minute. I think that from that very relaxed tone that he was taking, the sort of air of detachment he seemed to have, he was just playing along with my attempts to get him to negotiate. According to the Western media, Mr. Johnson said he warned Mr. Putin during the phone call in February of 2022 that invading Ukraine would lead to Western sanctions and more major troops on Russia's borders. Neither Mr. Putin nor the Kremlin have publicly commented on the alleged threat. Let's talk now to Victoria Seredia, Senior Fellow at the Forum of Trans-Regional Studies, Senior Researcher at the National Academy of Science in Ukraine. She joins us virtually from Berlin. Good morning to you, Victoria. Thank you for your time.
Morning.
There are several things happening, but I want to start from home. Apart from every other thing that is happening on the war front, the administration of Volodymyr Zelensky is also battling what it described as corruption. I don't know how much of this you know about or that you can tell us, but before war broke out in Ukraine, Ukraine had had a constant battle with corruption, the issue of oligarchs and all of that. Is this simply a continuation of that, except that it's during wartime?
We have to keep in mind that a lot of what you've heard on news about Ukrainian corruption was also part of a US election campaign. I was in US at that time, and whenever you switch TV, you will hear a lot of Ukraine corruption. But now, if you look at the EU countries or surrounding countries, you quite often see that they were not less corrupt than Ukraine in different deals with, for example, Russian firms. And even right now, during the hot stage of Russian aggression, we are constantly finding different firms which are trying to overcome the sanctions and still profit from trading with Russia, for example. And we have a lot of German or Austrian or other Hungarian officials actually being part of Russian business and politicians at the same time. So I guess it's very important to keep in mind that we have to have checks and balances everywhere. And for Ukraine right now, yes, this is partially continuation, but also we have a very new story. We have extremely resilient civil society. And this civil society exactly creates checks and balances because you hear those stories. They are not able to hide. And as soon as something is revealed, it's immediately part of investigation.
I asked that question because some of the officials that have been involved in this very latest battle have been officials very high up in the defense of the country or in the president's office. I mean, there's a deputy, I believe, interior or defense minister who was also caught up in all of this. Of course, it's necessary to emphasize that none of them have been found guilty. They've only been fired. So one can only assume that they will probably still face prosecution.
Yes, and actually Ukraine called for international commission to come and to do audit. So it's not only internal audit, but also international audit will be present in the country. And depending on the results of this audit, those people hopefully will be prosecuted.
Now, is this, do you think, I mean, I know you're very familiar with this because this is something that you research and you study all the time. Do you think this is, of course, possibly linked with the amount of money that has come into Ukraine, both in terms of humanitarian aid and other types of help that the international community has offered, and the mechanisms within Ukraine to be able to receive and spend this money in a judicious manner?
Yes, of course, but we also have to keep in mind that a lot of money is collected through the self-aid networks by Ukrainians, and Ukrainians quite often are spending much more in certain spheres that even international aid that is supplying, for example, more to the weaponry or more to the other types of spendings. And Ukrainian society learned to be quite open in the part of the civil society, but we are still need a long way to be as accountable as within the civil society. And if you have a lot of money, of course you will have temptation to misuse or abuse certain amounts of money. And this is very important that we do have groups which are targeting it. And we had very similar scandal, for example, in 2014 when the first war broke over Donbass, and there was also scandal linked exactly to the food which was bought by the Ministry of Defense to the army. So we already know the mechanisms and we know where to look at and how to prevent the stories.
Now, when I asked you the very first question, you did point out that we have to look at this from a much broader prism, and you referenced a lot of what was said during the campaigns in the United States. But I also wonder if you think that because Ukraine is currently a candidate to join the European Union, if you listen to what the Russians say, that is what this entire conflict is about, preventing Ukraine from joining the European Union. But then the EU itself had indicated that perhaps this issue of accountability was one of the hurdles that Ukraine needed to overcome if it was going to join the EU. Do you think what is going on now perhaps could be a setback?
No, I think it could be a good lesson. Because if we are to prepare to join EU, we have to target in all the possible ways anything that can prevent rule of law. So I guess this is a bell which government and a lesson which the government should learn and be even more proactive combating these issues within the country.
Now, you are in Berlin, in Germany, and the last time I spoke to you, there was quite a bit of a kerfuffle over whether or not Germany would send or give permission for other countries that had Leopard 2 tanks to send them to Ukraine. Well, of course, over the last couple of days, quite a lot of movement has happened in that respect. Not only will Ukraine get Leopard 2 tanks from those other countries like Poland, it will get them, in fact, from Germany as well. And it will also get Abrams tanks from the United States, amongst other equipment that has now been promised. The fear, of course, is that this may be late in coming because all these equipment still needs to be put together and shipped. Do you fear, as your president did say, that faster supplies, delayed supplies could be the difference?
Yes, very much so. It's you do feel extreme tension within the society because it's very difficult to hold on without the weaponry supplies for much longer. And we also have a lot of warnings from different EU officials who are saying that on the one side, we observing currently that Russia is taking all this war to another level, to a very different stage, and it's very difficult to combat at this level, compete with Russia in numbers of both the military people but also weaponry if you don't have it.
Given that scenario, of course, I know that you would probably be perhaps surprised, but definitely pleased that eventually these promises were made and that the weapons will come true. But then that leaves, as you pointed out in just your last answer, the fact that this takes the war to a whole new level. Since this is taking place in Ukraine, do you fear about the possible destruction that all of this could bring if the war is escalated to another level, tanks, and possibly the issue of aircraft, which has now surfaced as well?
Yes and no. Of course, any destruction is fearful for us because this is our country, and then will be the issue of rebuilding this country. At the same time, if you observe what was happening in Soledar or Bakhmut, you have troops standing there for months and a constant shelling when cities just disappear from the map because everything what is there is already shelled. So the question is if this war will be in this level when we are gradually standing in front of each other and just erasing all surrounding cities or villages. Would it be better, or if there will be some machine power which allow Ukraine to have a counteroffense and recapture its grounds? So I guess this is a very important question. However, we also have to keep in mind history. If you look historically at the situation of how the Soviet Union was fighting during the Second World War, then you immediately will see that the Soviet Union had incomparable losses because they never counted on human lives. For example, within 2 days, just to capture Kyiv, for the holiday, which was a Soviet holiday of Great October Revolution, almost 500,000 lives were spared. So it's very important to keep in mind that Russia is continuing this strategy without any counting of human lives on their side, but Ukraine is trying to count and save every human life.
Let me ask you, particularly because we have talked up to that point, all of this has meant that there's been a lot of internal movement within Ukraine by people who are seeking to move from places of conflict like Bakhmut and Soledar to safer places like Kyiv. What is the situation with that? Because in all the headlines, you don't really hear much about that.
The situation is very difficult because if you would see during the week, we already had a very big missile strike. So if people are heading towards bigger cities because this is the places they are seeking shelter, then the cities are left without electricity and all other infrastructure is quite often shelled. So it's very difficult to seek shelter in bigger cities. In this case, people have to look for some other shelters. Not so many are going abroad. And actually, I just was in Hungary, I taught there, and I was told that because of the rise of the prices for the electricity and gas, a lot of people who were staying for free within their families were asked to leave because the owners of those apartments were not able to cover bills for the utilities. So it means that actually in some cases, Ukrainians might be also moving back from some European countries to within the Ukraine and trying to seek shelter there.
Given, I mean, when this conflict started, so many promises were made, both for those who were fleeing and for those who stayed behind. It does appear as if at least some of those promises have not been kept. Otherwise, the kind of situation you've just described in Hungary shouldn't arise.
The matter is that it depends on the country and, of course, on the country possibilities. For example, again, for Hungary, the biggest issue is even for Hungarians, medical system. They were struggling with their medical system before, and imagine now you have thousands of people coming, and according to the rights which were given by EU to Ukrainian refugees, they are also have a right for free medical services. And this creates the issues within those countries. So it depends also on economic situation and internal infrastructural issues within different countries. And similarly, for example, we could compare the percent of people who are already employed in Poland, because language is quite similar, and also Poland quite easily gives the right to stay and work within their country. And in Germany, we have only 10% so far employed, because before to go to employment sector, you have to prove that you know language. So you have to take language courses, you have to learn language, and only after that you are allowed to enter job market.
Victoria, in a couple of days, but just over 3 weeks or thereabouts, this conflict will be a year old, and you and I have spoken at length on this program about this, about the various things that have arisen about this conflict. So I want to end our conversation today by asking you a personal question. You got out, you're in Berlin, but back home you have people who are back home and who I am sure you keep in touch with. What have they been telling you most recently about how things are? I know what goes on in the media is not necessarily what is the reality on the ground. So what really is the situation on a day-to-day basis back in Ukraine?
My family is there, a big part of my family. So it depends on the part of the country you are staying, because there are certain parts of the country which are constantly shelled. And even in your news today, you already had 2 cities which were shelled overnight. So this is a situation when any moment your city can be shelled. And in addition to that, you have infrastructure which is constantly repaired and shut down again by Russian missiles. And you have to be in between to survive in between those. So you have to adjust to power cuts, to be spending a lot of time in shelters because of the air raids, to cold, but people are quite resilient to that. So we don't observe a huge waves of people leaving the country still. So people are trying to accommodate themselves and their lives to what is happening and to the war.
And what has it been like being in Germany during all of this? How have you coped with that?
I'm trying to cope in my way, and for us Ukrainians, it is important to help whenever you are. So and you can do what is your expertise, or how can you yourself personally be involved. So first of all, I'm volunteering, and I'm also head of a big group of Ukrainian scholars, both who are currently in Ukraine because they cannot leave the country. These are male scholars, and other scholars which are scattered all around the country, and I coordinate their activity, and I'm trying to create a network of Ukrainian scholars within the country in this way, to give my input both to Ukrainian scholars to make them more resilient, and to create a networks with German society to give them voice and to foster dialogue between these 2 groups.
So in spite of the fact of what we've been talking about, you've tried to keep yourself busy. That is a spirit that is exemplary. Thank you so very much, Victoria Sirelia, for your time on the program. As always, do continue to stay safe, and we hope and pray that this conflict comes to an end very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
And after the break, European Union seeks ways to ensure accountability for crimes in Ukraine's war. Details in a moment. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. A loud explosion struck a military-industrial factory near the central Iranian city of Isfahan overnight in what Tehran said was a drone strike by unidentified attackers. There was no immediate claim of responsibility for the blast, which came amidst tension with the West over Tehran's nuclear activity and the supply of arms for Russia's war in Ukraine, as well as months of anti-government demonstrations at home. Iran's foreign minister said, quote, the cowardly attack was aimed at creating insecurity in Iran, while the defense ministry said the explosion caused only minor damage and had no casualties. Meanwhile, a U.S. official says Israel appears to have been behind that overnight attack on the military factory in Iran. The U.S. official, speaking anonymously, said it did appear that Israel was involved. Pentagon spokesperson Brigadier General Patrick Ryder said no U.S. military forces were involved in strikes in Iran, but declined to comment further. The extent of damage could not be independently ascertained, but Iranian state media released footage showing a flash in the sky and emergency vehicles at the scene. And NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says NATO is concerned about North Korea's, quote, reckless missile tests and nuclear weapons program, while the war in Ukraine has ramifications for Asia. He made this known while speaking to South Korea's Foreign Minister Park Jin. Meanwhile, North Korea has said NATO involvement in the Asia-Pacific region would import the conflict raging in Europe. Both North Korea and Russia have denied U.S. accusations that North Korea is supplying weapons for the war in Ukraine.
We are, of course, concerned about the reckless missile tests and the nuclear programs of North Korea, and the war in Ukraine has also ramifications for your region. And we also know that North Korea is providing military support to the Russian war efforts with rockets and missiles, and this just highlights how we are interconnected. We strongly believe that we can do more together in areas like cyber, like technology, and also when it comes to arms control and non-proliferation. So there are many areas where we really believe that even stronger partnership between the Republic of Korea and NATO can be of mutual benefit.
Given today's unprecedented global challenges, we believe that solidarity among countries that share values of freedom, democracy, and rule of law is more important than ever.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says Turkey may respond differently to Finland's NATO bid than to Sweden's amidst rising tension between Stockholm and Ankara. Both Sweden and Finland have applied to join the 30-member military alliance after Russia's invasion of Ukraine sparked renewed security concerns across the region. All NATO members, of which Turkey is one, must accept their bids for membership to be approved. Speaking at a meeting with youth in the country's Belichik province, Mr. Erdogan said, quote, we may respond differently to Finland if necessary. Sweden will be shocked when we respond differently to Finland. Turkey has previously urged Sweden to take a clearer stance against what it sees as terrorists, mainly Kurdish militants, and a group it blames for a 2016 coup attempt. Let's talk now to Chukwemeka Eze, former lecturer on diplomatic and consular relations law at the Faculty of Law at the Nasarawa State University in Kefi. He joins us from our Abuja studios. Good morning to you, Mr. Eze. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, Keredolu. Ale. Good morning.
Thank you very much. Let's start off with this issue of the NATO bids by Sweden and Finland. Now, the negotiations were already complicated because Turkey was asking for action by both countries on what it sees as terrorists, as we've been reporting, Kurdish militants. But the situation was made worse a couple of days ago when we had the demonstrations in Stockholm where some actions were taken that suggested disrespect, at least from the perspective of Turkey and a number of other Islamic countries. This has made the situation worse, and Turkey has made it clear that it does not intend to support at least Sweden's bid, possibly even Finland's. What do you make of this?
Yes, what I make of it is that from the beginning, Turkey had been reluctant to approve the joining of NATO by Finland and Sweden. But it had been under pressure from the United States of America and some other NATO members. And Turkey gave its conditions. It seems Finland and Sweden have substantially complied, but Turkey is not satisfied with that compliance. But like you said, it has been worsened by the the right-wing activists that destroyed a religious book in Stockholm. And taking it historically, you realize that up till 1917, Turkey was the country that preserved the holy centers of Islam. It was in 1917, after Turkey supported Germany and lost the First World War, that its protection of the holy places was taken away. Palestine was given to Britain, Iraq to Britain, Syria and Lebanon to France, Saudi Arabia, as you know, all these places from 1517 to 1917, 400 years, Turkey protected Palestine, up to what you call Israel today. Now, anything that affects Islam, Turkey feels involved. So from that historical perspective, Turkey will want Sweden to make a categorical statement that it is not supporting right-wing activists to insult the religion that Turkey protected for centuries. So to that extent, you will now understand why President Erdogan made that statement, because such a thing has not occurred in Finland, but it has happened in Sweden. So it can, on that ground, eventually accept that Finland should join, but refuse that Sweden should join. Beyond the issue of the Kurdish separatist movement and the coup that took place in 2016. If there is time, I can go into that also.
Indeed, but of course, there are other things that are playing up here. We also reported about North Korea and what is going on with reference to the issues of supplying arms to Russia to fight in Ukraine. The question I have on that, can you still hear me?
I hear you.
Okay, I wonder why there's so much pressure on North Korea now, because North Korea has never hidden its own position with regards to things like this. It will definitely not go with the West. It has said it will never give up nuclear weapons because as far as they're concerned, giving up nuclear weapons will equate regime change. And they're very good friends with Russia and China. So how does all of this play out in your mind, given the fact that the Western allies are trying to get these countries, North Korea, Iran, and so on, not to support Russia in its conflict in Ukraine?
Yes, the way it plays out in my mind is that the Western allies will not succeed. Going into history, you recall that the Korean War between 1950 and 1953 was fought. The United States supported South Korea, and China and Russia supported North Korea. So history is a beach. History repeats itself. So North Korea has not forgotten. And remember that war did not end in a peaceful settlement. There is a armistice anyway, but it means that that war can still be rekindled any day. So North Korea is not losing that historical mindset that it could still return to war, and it will still need the cooperation of China and Russia. Europe is so much worried because previously Europe thought, oh, this is a North Korean American business. But now that Ukraine, being part of Europe, has come into the equation, Europe is worried that with a consistent supply of North Korean weapons and the unrestrained tests, missile tests that North Korea is conducting, and the threat North Korea remains to its next door neighbor, that's South Korea, that Europe will certainly not be in peace if North Korea increases its activities. And NATO you are aware of Article 5 of the NATO agreement that an attack on one is an attack on all. Some European members are members of NATO, and there is no way that the military activities of North Korea, whether in Europe or in Asia or in any part of the world, will not have effect on NATO members as well as on Europe. So I think the situation is enlarging, it is expanding, and the fear is there that unless North Korea is cobbled or brought into a circumscribed situation, that we may be heading to another world war.
Let me take you to the other side and the fact that so many countries now have overcome their initial reluctance to provide Ukraine with tanks. And there is even talk now that in the days and weeks to come, you might even have aircraft also crossing over to Ukraine to help it fight Russia. The initial reluctance was based on not wanting to escalate the conflict and not wanting a situation where World War III could start from this initial conflict. That's what we were told. What do you think is the difference between what we were told then and what is now happening now, especially with a country like Germany, which was initially completely reluctant to provide any other kind of assistance other than humanitarian and non-offensive, now agreeing to supply tanks? And then, of course, a whole host of other countries, Poland, France, Britain, the US, and so on, all are now piling in with all kinds of weapons for Ukraine.
Yes, you are right, Akaredulu. At the beginning, they thought they could bring Russia to the diplomatic table. So they didn't want to escalate the situation. They didn't want to give those tanks so as to unsettle the equilibrium, the military equilibrium, which Russia is having the upper hand. So they felt that, okay, if they left the issue of supply of tanks and the fighters, that Russia will see it in that light that, okay, they were cooperating and they could come to the diplomatic table. But things have taken a new turn. Russia is now ready to listen to these European countries, and Russia has now stratified who their friends are and who their friends are not. So with that, they've given up. Germany that felt at the time it was close to Russia and it could talk to Russia, Germany has given up. And it has dilly-dallied, but it has come to under pressure from the United States of America and other European powers that definitely with the amount of destruction of lives and properties taking place in Ukraine, that a defeat of Ukraine by not supplying them tanks will lead to more consequences beyond Ukraine. So they are beginning to realize that since diplomacy has failed, what is at stake is democracy. If Ukraine is defeated, definitely many countries within the Eastern Europe will return to Russian protection, military protection. And this is what they don't want. You can see what is happening to Latvia. The Latvian ambassador has already been expelled from Russia. Going back to the issue of tanks, Canada has agreed to give tanks. Poland had been pushing. And today, as at today, definitely the Leopard 2 tanks will be supplied, but no date has actually been given. But it is expected that in February, the Leopard 2 tanks will be supplied. The Abrams tanks from the United States will be supplied. And negotiation on fighters are going on. The F-16s from the United States of America, the French Rafales and the Gripen of Sweden, all these are on the table for discussion. But how soon will they come? Because analysts have taken a position that it is likely that at the end of February or at the beginning of March, there will be new offensive from Russia. And this new offensive, it will be difficult for the combatants, Ukrainian combatants who have been at the war fronts, to be able to contain it without this equipment. So President Zelensky of Ukraine has already cried out that there is acute set of activities going on at the war front. Nobody knows how far they can withstand the bombardment and shelling of Vuleda, Bakhmut, Solidar, and Blahodatne, inclusive of Mariupol, Kherson, Melitopol, parts of Luhansk, and other parts of Donetsk. Certainly, it will be difficult for them to hold on for as long as the Russians held on during the Second World War in the protection of Stalingrad, I think about 250 days. So will the Ukrainians, with the weapons they have now, hold on to these parts of Donetsk, Luhansk, and other parts, like Zaporizhia? So will they hold on for this length of time? That is why the supply of these tanks have become necessary, and it has to come as fast as possible. Otherwise, Ukraine will fall in no distant time. And one is also worried that as Russia is about celebrating 1 year of the Russian invasion, it will be conducting a drill in South Africa. So Africa has come into the picture. It will be conducting a drill in Durban with China between February 17 and February 27. So the war is getting closer and getting closer and getting closer.
Yeah, because I must add, of course, that just as the Russians are preparing to do those drills with South Africa and China, the Americans are currently also engaged in drills with Nigeria and a couple of other countries. That kicked off just over the weekend, the Obangame Express, which talks about the Gulf of Guinea and security, anti-piracy, and all of that. So as you say, everyone is somehow getting drawn into this. But very briefly, let me ask you this. What's your prognosis as we approach the first year of this conflict in Ukraine? What's your prognosis, very briefly?
Okay, as we approach the first anniversary of the war, I look forward to the war getting more intense, more equipment being put into the war, and before long, more than Ukraine will be fighting this war, because the interest of Ukraine has been subsumed to the interest of Europe. A defeat of Ukraine will be a defeat of the European Union. And not only that, it will be a defeat of NATO. The propaganda in Russia is that NATO is fighting this war. So a victory over Ukraine will be a victory over NATO and a victory over Europe. I bet Nigeria has something to with the threat over the supply of wheat through the Odessa seaport. I'm aware that the foreign minister of France inspected facilities at Odessa airport, and it is feared that soon it's likely that Russia may attack to dissuade Ukraine from. We can take advantage of this by increasing our wheat production, and with the supply of energy running short in Europe, we can also maximize our supply of energy, petroleum and gas, and ensure that in the course of this war, we gain a lot, at least to improve our economy, which is experiencing serious debt crisis. I've just seen from your screen that Moody has downgraded Nigeria. Economically, we need to exploit advantages that lie in the course of this war to ensure that our economy progresses. I look forward to seeing that, at least from the end of the first anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which will be February 24, 2023.
Thank you very much, Chukwuemeka Eze, former lecturer on diplomatic and consular relations law at the Nasarawa State University. As always, your perspective, extremely interesting. Thank you so very much for your time.
Thank you. I'm grateful.
Let's now talk to Laddie Williams. Of course, you did hear Chukwuemeka Eze there talking about the various things that that we could do, and that he expects to happen with this conflict going ahead. Let's take a quick look at some of the stories. Moody's downgrade of Nigeria. How big is that playing out? Does it already have an impact on the market?
It's obviously a big one, because at the end of the day, you don't want your ratings, to be downgraded, because that increases your cost of borrowing, in the international markets. And we're already seeing, the impact of that, seeing how debt servicing price has gone up. We're paying so much just to service debt at this point. We've seen, our debt levels, balloon. And obviously, 2023, it's a new year, and there's a lot to be done. We've passed the budget for 2023. That deficit has to be funded. And going to the international markets, that means you're going to have to pay more. Nobody wants to go there, at this time. We see what's happening, with Ghana at this time, trying to restructure their debt. You don't want to get to that point where you want to start, restructuring your debt, because
and asking for help.
Help and extensions and all of that. So it's obviously it's a bleak outlook, we're getting, for debt levels and all of that this year.
Now, it's not looking better generally. How are markets shaping up after central bank rate meetings?
So it's, well, a lot is happening. We had an incredible January for, global equities markets. They've all rallied in January, from the US, Europe, Asia, and even Bitcoin. That's seen, new highs. But all of this will be tested, this week. We have the Fed. They're going to be, meeting 31st, first meeting, for the year. The ECB, they're meeting on Thursday. There's going to be a rate hike. That's the consensus.
The question is how much?
By how much? And, a surprise, might come out of this, even though, we're all expecting, a lower rate hike.
Maybe
we're
more
expecting,
like 50 basis points.
Yes, for the ECB.
Maybe.
Then 25 basis points for the US Fed. But, at the end of the day, there's still, it's still earnings season. So we're expecting big, earnings data this week, for the US from Facebook, Meta, Google, all of them. Their results are coming out. Depends on, what comes out, if they're going to beat expectations or they're going to be below expectation, because it was a tough year. In 2022, that's for Q4 2022. So all of this is going to shape what's going to happen next in the markets. We're expecting volatility, but it's been an incredible January, for most of these assets that, plunged once Russia actually invaded Ukraine. That was last year. So anything you bought at that time, you're down a whole lot. But we've seen them, give some great gains in January.
Slightly. Now, the EU is extending economic sanctions against Russia by 6 months. That's existing sanctions. By further 6 months. But from what you and I have discussed on this program repeatedly, the Russians would have factored this in.
Oh, yes. And the truth is, with the data we've been getting from Russia, from the ruble, it might look like, these sanctions are not having, an impact, but they are. They are actually, having a big impact, because with a research organization just released information, some data on Russian exports of fossil fuels, and they're losing about 160 million euros a day. That's what Russia is losing because of these sanctions, and that's a big number. That means 2023, they have to start looking for new markets to sell their fossil fuels.
Plug up this gap,
because the gaps are going to get bigger as the sanctions are being extended. Then there's also the February 5th cap. That's another cap on refined fossil fuel products. So that's another big one, because we know India and China, they've been buying, cheap oil.
They're about to get more discounts.
Exactly. And obviously it's costing more for them to get, some of these products, to these countries. And it's going to get even more expensive. There's still going to be more gaps in 2023, because now with this extension, with more caps, coming on the horizon, their revenue is going to be tested, from fossil fuels. So Russia needs to really, it's time to look for new markets at this time. And finding new markets it's
not easy, given the situation.
Exactly.
Given the situation that
so they have a lot to deal with at this time. Looks like revenue is still going to be cut. more going forward.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Ladi, for that. Of course, Ladi and the team come up after this with the latest from around the world. So watch out for him and the rest of the crew. Thanks, Ladi.
Thank you.
The European Union's 27 justice ministers have met in Stockholm, Sweden, to discuss ways to bring prosecutions and accountability for crimes committed in Ukraine. The ministers met ahead of the February 24 anniversary of Russia's full-scale attack on Ukraine. The European Union wants swift accountability, even as it differed over the methods in a debate about how to bring prosecutions. The ministers discussed collecting evidence as well as setting up a new international tribunal to prosecute Moscow's aggression.
Press briefing ensuring accountability for war crimes committed in Ukraine is a top priority for our presidency. It's most certainly a complex issue, but in order to accomplish this, judicial cooperation is crucial. Several member states have started national investigations into core international crimes committed in Ukraine. Ukraine and several EU member states have also, with support from Eurojust, established a joint investigation team. Furthermore, Eurojust has been given a new mandate to preserve, analyze and store evidence of core international crimes.
Thanks to its new mandate, Eurojust is now testing a new core international crimes evidence database to store and preserve evidence of war crimes. This evidence can be used for future trials maybe, because we'll have a lot, to ensure accountability for the crimes committed in the context of the Ukraine war. So it's not only the way to collect, to store, but also to exchange with many different prosecutors at the national level, but also at the international level, the evidence. This is extremely important given the extent of possible war crimes. Nearly 65,000 incidents of alleged international crimes have been reported so far.
And finally, on the program, tearful mourners in Kiev commemorated a British volunteer killed while attempting a rescue mission from the eastern Ukrainian town of Soledar. British volunteer aid worker Andrew Bagshaw, for whom the service was held, and fellow volunteer Chris Parry were killed during an attempted humanitarian evacuation in eastern Ukraine. Fellow volunteers who knew Mr. Bagshaw and others who came to express their condolences packed into a small church on the territory of Kiev's ancient St. Sophia Cathedral for a service led by an Orthodox priest. Volunteer Ignat Ivlev York, who organized Mr. Bagshaw's memorial service, said, quote, "I remember one of the first times when we went on an evacuation run together. He was a very quiet person. He just wanted to help people. He felt that this was his mission and that he had a duty to do it." Several dozen mourners and well-wishers also gathered to bid their family farewells. That's our program this morning. Thanks for being with us. My name is Ladi Akeridolu. Do have a pleasant Monday and week ahead. Good morning.